Hello, we're on Chapter 9, Network and Internet Security. We've got a lot to cover in this chapter. Up to this point, you've reviewed networks, you've reviewed the internet, we've covered quite a bit on hardware and software, and now we're going to look at making sure that you are safely navigating these different things that we've covered up to this point in the course. Some of our objectives is we're going to see why you should be concerned about network and internet security, some examples of unauthorized access, some ways to protect against unauthorized access, including control systems, firewalls, etc., sabotage, uh, protecting against sabotage, online theft, steps you can take as an individual to protect yourself, personal safety on the internet, steps you can do to safeguard your personal safety on the internet, and kind of look at the current state of network and internet security. Now, while we're looking at the overview, something you should know at this point is that the lectures that you are getting on the course, whether it be from me or other professors who teach the same course, are not completely comprehensive. So, as you are watching this should not be a replacement for doing the reading. The content is very dense, especially if this is new to you and you need to take it in. You should get your inputs and more than one from more than one source. So I encourage you to keep doing those readings if you have not, because you really want to kind of ingrain these core concepts into your mind. So, a brief overview of the chapter. We're going to look a lot at security concerns that come from computer networks. And the rationale behind this is that in essence, everything you do online is a network concern. Everything that you do on your phone, with it being a mobile connected device, is a network concern. So security stemming from computer networks is a very big part of your digital life. We're also going to look at some of the safeguards and precautions that you can take to make sure that you don't fall a victim to these things, some personal safety issues related to the internet, and some legislators, your politicians at work, what is related, what laws out there related to network and internet security. So if we're going to talk about concerns, the first thing we should do is state for you the reason why you should be concerned. What is it out there that you need to be aware of and be cautious about concerning the internet? Well, it begins with cybercrime. And this is just really any illegal act that involves a computer. Now, where do we see this? Stealing data, theft of financial assets, manipulating data for personal advantage, sabotage. Everyone should be concerned about cybercrime. We think of it as something you would see in like Ocean's 11, where a gang of criminals are stealing 15 cents from every account and it adds up to billions of dollars. But, a simple act of cybercrime would be someone impersonating you on a social network to get access to your other sensitive data. So that's something we should be aware about. The next one is unauthorized access or unauthorized use of a computer system. Now, what does this mean? Someone gains access to a computer network. Again, you probably imagine or picture someone, a secret spy, impersonating a naval officer at the Pentagon, gaining access to list of CIA agents and where they're deployed. But it does not have to be anything so so magical or fantastic. It can simply be someone gaining access to your work computer if you work in a place that has sensitive data. So what are we talking about? If you work in a medical facility and that data is all HIPAA protected, if someone impersonates you or gets access to your computer in an unauthorized way, that's a security breach. If someone uses your computer for unauthorized activities, like WKU has a computing policy. If someone is using computers to play video games when they're not approved to do that, or watch pornography or other illicit materials, that's an unauthorized use, and that's a security concern. Both can be committed by people who have access but are gaining access to something that they should not be getting access to, or by people who are completely outside of the organization, outsiders. And then for this to happen, there has to be a code of conduct in place to determine what behavior is appropriate and what behavior is not appropriate. But it doesn't stop there. When we're talking about unauthorized access and unauthorized use, there's other things like hacking. This is where we break into a computer system. And we've seen, you've seen this. The most popular example of this is probably on the movie The Social Network, where Mark Zuckerberg's character breaks into the Harvard system to populate his website, the Facebook. And in that it seemed like a benign, gracious act. But hacking into computer systems sometimes are very serious threats. And a lot of times they're even considered cyber terrorism. And this is where someone is breaking into something in an unauthorized manner. Another way that this happens is called war driving. And this is where you go around looking for Wi Fi area networks to access and to get access to the internet in a somewhat anonymous fashion because you're going to a place where you would not be allowed to normally go. And the people who do use that access are controlled and specific. So if you're using that network, you're assumed to be one of those individuals who are allowed to use it. And while we're talking about kind of Wi-Fi networks, we should also talk about Wi-Fi piggybacking. And this is where you use an unsecured Wi-Fi network. When you're using a network you should not be using from a location without authorization. And why do we do this? There's a lot of ways and reasons to do this, but one that the author draws our attention to is to intercept communications. So back during the Sochi Olympics, a lot of internationals were going to Russia for the Olympics, and as soon as they would get to Russia, they'd log on to the first unsecured Wi-Fi network. And now what do we mean log on? Does that mean that they went into a browser, loaded up a website, typed in their username and password? Well, no. What they did is they just connected to a Wi-Fi network, and then the apps on their phone, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and if they did some banking, all that stuff automatically logged in to their respective websites. And people who were intercepting these communications were able to steal their information to these very sensitive websites. So what we're talking about here is that unsecured messages, your Facebook login information, your Instagram login information, can be intercepted. What we're seeing as a new trend in this area is intercepting credit and debit card information during the credit card verification process. So if I make a purchase on a network that is not secure, I may, in essence, be giving away my credit and debit card information and inviting, we can call them cyber criminals, cyber terrorists, cyber anything. I'm inviting them to go shopping on my dime because I'm not securing my way through the internet. And this is done through packet sniffing. We talked about packets a couple lectures ago. And a packet is just a little bit of information that builds up to a larger amount of information. And this type of interception of communications is normally what we see happens when we're not using a protected means of interacting with the internet. So, if we're talking about using protected means, how do we protect against these different uses, these different unauthorized access or use of networks? Well, the first thing we can do is create an access control system. Now, everything that is of value comes with planning. And if we use an access control system, we can control the facilities, that's the physicality of the network. We can control the computer network, that's the participants of the network. We can control the databases, this is the data which the network is a platform for. And then we can also control the accounts, the people who are allowed to use the network. When we do this type of level of control, we can mitigate some of those risks that we just talked about and be very cautious against those those unethical cyber activities. Now, so what does this look like? We're talking about identification systems, something to verify the person who has access is actually the person who is trying to access the system. Same thing with authentication systems. We want to verify the person who says they are a user actually is the user. Now, to go through that a little bit more, to have these kind of knowledge access systems, we have to make sure there's information that only the person who is supposed to be in the system has. And we call this possessed knowledge. What does this look like? It looks like passwords. That's a possessed knowledge. If I go to a website and I create a password, well, no one possesses the knowledge of that password but me. Now, how do we keep that password strong? How do we keep it secure? Well, it should be changed frequently and it should be strong. But what does strong mean? That is one of those words that doesn't really have a particular meaning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a browser here. Give me a second. Um, it shows up kind of wonky on the screen because with this screen recording, I'm not showing you my entire screen. I'm just showing you a portion. So let's get here and let's look up a strong password generator. Okay. So when we're talking about a strong password, we want to generate something that is difficult for someone to guess, okay? And we'll look at later how to do that. So let's just come here and hit generate password. So this is our new password. Now this is strong because it's difficult for someone to just come up with this password. Now, but the issue with this is that it's also difficult to remember. And that's one of our disadvantages, is that this type of password is very difficult to remember. It's easily forgotten. And if someone else knows it with this system that's only based on a password, if someone else gets your password, in essence, they are you while they're using the computer system. Now, some password strategies are to make the password at least 8 characters, choose passwords that aren't in a dictionary, don't use your name, your pet's names, nothing that someone could social engineer. There's a good episode of this British Sherlock series where there is a captain of a military group, and Sherlock sits at his computer and then within 30 seconds of deep thought comes up with the password and breaks into a system. That is exactly what we want to avoid, okay? I'm not going to go over each of these password strategies. They're in figure 9.4 in your book. I'd like you to look at them and review them. You may see these on the test, okay? So we talked about possessed knowledge access systems. Let's talk about cognitive authentication systems and two-factor authentication, okay? Now, cognitive are things that are based on your memory, things that are kind of are experiences that are unique to you. In essence, these are the forgot password questions, and they're typically used in password recovery systems. So, if I create a website, it'll say, where was your father born? And I'm supposed to remember that. Something I do, and I would recommend you do that, is that if it asks you what's your pet's name, get in the habit of answering it with the last 5 digits of your mom's social security number or something. Something completely unrelated, but that question always equals this unrelated piece of data every time. Or maybe it says, maybe your question is, what's your favorite color? And you always, every time you use that question, type in the city in which you were born. That'll make that question more secure and something you can still remember without necessarily being easily socially engineered, okay? So let's look at this again. The next one is a two-factor authentication. Now, this one is where you use 2 different methods to authenticate when you're using a system, all right? Now, the beauty of this is that there's the possessed knowledge feature, which is typically a password. Then there is the two-factor feature, which is something that is not just easily gathered. Sometimes it can be a biometric feature. We'll talk about that. Possessed object, we already talked about that. Those are the 2 initial ones. But then the second one could be a hard token, which is a physical object, or a one-time password. Now, I use this in my Google Gmail. There's one password that I use to log in, and then once I hit enter, it sends me a text message. And by sending me a text message, it actually, what's the word I am looking for? It actually accomplishes 2 things at once. The first thing is that hard token is accomplished because to receive that text message, I have to have a physical device associated with me capable of receiving a text message. So that's either my iPhone or my iPad, or maybe my iMac, but those are at least three physical objects. The second thing is that it sends me a one-time password. So what this means is that the password it sends me is unique for that one login. It expires, and if someone was to capture the last one I had, it still would not authenticate them to do something in the future. So this two-step authentication is a very critical piece in being secure on these internet networks, okay? Pay attention to this kind of technology, because what we will see in the future is that eventually you will have no choice but to participate in two-step authentication. With the big stink over the celebrities whose nude photos were leaked in the past couple years from their Apple iPhotos and whatnot, and the more of your life that exists in the cloud, you're going to see that the two-step kind of authentication is going to be very, very important. Now, to look at this again, to go a little more in deep, we talked about the possessed object systems. It could either be a smart card, a badge, a USB security key. What the advantages are, you have to have it. The disadvantages are if you lose it, it can cause all types of issues. A friend of mine worked in the military. He worked in military intelligence. And the issue he had is that, let's say you have a 4-star general who has a possessed object access system, something like a key card or something like that. They go to a restaurant, they get something to eat, they leave their key card there, and then when they come back on base, they do not have their object to get back into base. Now, could the IT person just let the general in? Well, for most people, that's okay because it's not a big deal if someone loses their key card to just make another one. For someone who has secret level, code level clearance, if you impersonate their key card, that's a federal offense. So what happens is this disadvantage of losing a physical object has now become a very, very serious disadvantage because it could lead to jail time. So these advantages and disadvantages have to be weighed. If there's going to be a physical object, that physical object is very, very precious. But it also makes sure that you can very specifically limit the access to that system. Biometric access takes the key card idea, something you possess, but it uses something that you cannot get rid of, something like your fingerprint, the shape of your hand, the structure of your face, your eyeball, your iris, or your voice. And then they use some type of computer system to turn this stuff into digital information and use it as a password. So it's still a possessed object. You possess your eyeball. I mean, at least you do for now. I hope you possess both your eyeballs. So it's a possessed object, but it's at a higher level. It's not like a key card, something you could lose. Now, when we think about how biometrics are used, often is to control access to secure facilities. On NCIS, for some reason on that show, someone has to use their eyeball to operate the elevator. I don't understand that, but hey, why not? Some advantages is that you really can't lose it. The systems can be very accurate, but sometimes the problem, just with the others, is that you cannot reset it, and it's very expensive. It's new technology, and it's something that costs quite a bit. So let's jump right into Wi-Fi networks. Something to think about when it comes to wireless networks is that it is less secure than a wired network. So the question is why? Why is it less secure? It's not that the data is any different on a wired network versus a Wi-Fi network. The issue is that a Wi-Fi network is broadcasting in many different directions. So it's easy to intercept. If I want to figure out what's traveling on a wire, I have to breach that wire at some point. For Wi-Fi, I don't have to do that. It's a lot easier. It takes a lot less know-how to find a Wi-Fi network. Now, what should you do as a wireless network owner to be safe, or what should you encourage your loved ones, your parents, your grandparents to do to make sure that they are practicing kind of some security when they're on a wireless network? The first thing is change the router's default password. This seems obvious, but a lot of times it's never done. And if you've got AT&T or Verizon or Time Warner, when they set it up, they're going to make it the owner of the service's phone number. Well, that's pretty obvious. So someone could really just break into your network if they know your phone works. They could so easily socially engineer that out of you. Enable encryption and make sure that you can add other security features like hiding the network name. Now, personally, I don't hide the network name on my home wireless network. I do enable encryption. The password is a very strong password, but you could probably find it. I'm not going to share what the name of the network is, but it does show up if someone's looking for it. And where would it show up? It would show up right here where the network name is the SSID. Okay? Now, the book will tell you how this works. It'll show you how to secure a router using a D-Link example. I encourage you to look at that. Okay? The next thing we are going to look at is protecting against unauthorized use. Excuse me. And we're going to look at it specifically when we talk about IPS systems. The book covers firewalls. I want you to read that on your own, but we're going to look at some of the harder things to kind of visualize. So the first one is an intrusion prevention system. Now, where would we use this? We would use this in places where there's some sensitive data. Your firewall may actually do this. And what it does is it prevents people trying to break into your computer, okay? Now, of course, when we're saying break in, no one's coming at your front desk with a screwdriver trying to open the box on the floor. We're talking about them trying to use a hole or an opening in one of your network ports to stick in some type of malicious software to then get your data. And this is all about capturing your data, okay? Now, how do we stop this? One system is to use encryption. Encryption is where we turn something that can be read into something that cannot be read. Something that can be understood into something that cannot be understood. And there's a couple different ones. One's SSL, EVSSL, those are secure web pages. Two different methods that are out there is one's called private key, the other is public key. With private key, you and the person you're communicating with both have the exact same key code, and they use that to decrypt the data. With public keys, there are two different key codes, and each can be used with the other to decrypt the data, and they come through a security certificate. There is a nice diagram of this on 9/11, and what it shows is that an email is sent. Joe uses a public key. He sends the email, and then the recipient opens it with a private key. Okay, so that's kind of a dual key system there. I want you to look into that a little bit. And something to know about this encryption, I'm not going to go heavy into it now because we're already about a half an hour in, is that there are various strengths. Now, there's a trade-off when it comes with strength of encryption versus size of encryption, okay? So for example, the stronger the encryption, the harder it is to crack it. It's not impossible, but given enough time and resources, any and every security protocol can be broken. But the bigger the encryption key, the harder it is to do that. But if you look at these these numbers here, so 128-bit encryption and 2048-bit encryption, okay? Well, 2048 is 2 kilobits, okay? So if you think about it, 2 kilobits per packet, and remember, packets are small bits of information that we send over the network. A lot of your packet is just going to be the encryption. So this will make a slow internet connection a lot slower because you're going to spend a lot of your bandwidth just with the encryption. Now, for things that are very sensitive, like military information, this is absolutely a trade-off worth making. Now, do you need this amount of encryption for your Instagram a selfie of you at a burger joint? Probably not. Unless there's like secret military codes embedded in the lettuce of the burger. I can't imagine you needing that level of encryption for that type of use. So strong is about where you want to stay for everyday use. If you know you're doing something very sensitive, in your professional career, if you happen to have if you're working in a capacity where you'll be sending trade secrets or best practices, you may want to opt for those communications to go military. But otherwise, 128-bit encryption is typically enough. Okay. Now, another way, not instead of, but alongside of encryption, is what's called a virtual private network. This is a VPN. What VPNs do is they allow you to securely access a small portion of the internet. Okay. Now it's virtual because it's accomplished through using access to a small amount of equipment versus a private secure network, which is a huge network that is completely secure. I actually use VPNs when I surf the web um, at home just because it allows me to interact with the internet in a way that no one can see my web traffic. And this is something that if you ever travel abroad or you're using other people's internet, you may want to look at a VPN. Now, VPNs are free or sometimes they cost money depending on the level of security you want. And a lot of businesses require you to use this if you want to work on your business documents while you're at home. But VPN is another secure way to kind of access information. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to look at here is sensible employee precautions. Okay. Well, let's just think of some things we can do sensibly to make sure that we're safe on the internet. Okay. And I'm I'm going to stop saying okay. There's a character on South Park who says that, and I just realized I said it about 5 times in a row. So here's the last one. Okay. With sensible employee precautions, what we can do is use what we know about people to make good data choices, good network choices. We need to screen potential new hires to see if they are risky, if they engage in risky behavior. We should watch for employee moods, gruntled employees or ex employees. We should constantly give engage stakeholders to review their security levels and make sure we're developing policies that incorporate encryption, private networks, strong passwords to ensure that we're securing the network we're using. And then you can use software like firewalls, IPS systems to monitor the devices on the network to make sure they're not compromised. And something you should think about is when we're talking about BYOD, bring your own device. Now, you're probably thinking, I don't really understand what bring your own device has to do with me. Okay. I said it again. Okay. Well, here you go. Here's a good example. If you use the wireless network on any of WKU's campuses, you are bringing your own device, your Android or iPhone phone, your Android or iPhone to the campus, and you're using that network. So that is a BYOD scenario. So, as a network administrator at WKU, what's going through their minds when people bring their own devices? Well, it's cheaper for them. It's a lot cheaper for Western just to provide the Wi Fi instead of trying to provide you with a computer to do your computing on. But there are some significant security disadvantages. It's difficult for the help desk to first make sure that your Android or iPhone is secure. It's difficult for them to provide help, whether to help you navigate issues you have on that device, since your device is different than anyone else's same device. And it's also different for them to containerize your software, your apps. Because let's say that you have an app that's infected with a virus. Well, it's very difficult for them to isolate that off of the network once you connect to it. Okay? And we're going to look at that a little bit more in the second half. So, in this first part, we've covered a lot of material in terms of network security, passwords, being safe. We're going to pick up with the next portion of this chapter here in a little bit.